Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Coley Anderson, and I am Senior Enterprise Solution Advisor, as well as the Director of Industry and Government Relations for Registrar Corp. It is my pleasure to have you join us today for our webinar entitled Trump 2.0 Adapting to Change, Navigating FDA Regulatory Shifts and Evolving Tariff Policies. I'm joined by two experts today who I know very well, David Lenars, co-founder and president of Registrar Corp, and Cynthia Wittenberg, executive vice president at the National Customs Broker and Forwarders Association of America. David Lenars is a globally recognized expert in U.S. FDA regulations. He has lectured around the world for trade associations, corporate interests, and foreign governments. He has led Registrar Corp since its founding in 2003, and now the firm assists over 32,000 companies around the world in 190 countries. Prior to joining the NCBFAA, Cynthia Wittenberg served as the Deputy Executive Assistant Commissioner in Customs and Border Protection Office of Trade in Washington, D.C. She spent more than 30 years at CBP, joining the agency as an import specialist in the Port of New Orleans, and was promoted over the years to increasing senior management roles within the agency. She joined NCBFA in 2023 as VP of their Educational Institute. We welcome Cynthia and David. Well, we're excited to get started today. We've divided today's webinar into three sections. David will first talk about recent changes at the FDA and what we can expect in the months ahead. Then we'll have Cynthia discuss the evolving tariff situation and how we might expect that to play out in the coming weeks and months. And then lastly, we'll address questions from the audience. Well, now let's get started. David, we'll start with you. Tell us how today's FDA differs from just a short several months ago.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from. Thank you very much, Coley. Appreciate the introduction here. Today we'll kick off with, just very high level, what's happening at FDA, and then more specifically, we'll dive into each of the sectors regulated by FDA, recognizing today that many of you may be joining from different sectors: food and beverages, medical devices, pharmaceutical, cosmetics. So we'll address what's new, what's taking shape in those various sectors. But let's first start off high level, what's new at FDA. As many of you have certainly heard, a new Secretary of Health under President Trump was brought on board, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., an environmental attorney, a longtime health policy advocate, and his focus, what he brings, according to his interest during his confirmation process, is really a reform-minded agenda, increased transparency, strengthening regulatory oversight, and helping to really reshape or focusing on reshaping U.S. health and food policy to prioritize consumer protections. You'll see here on the screen, we've outlined just some of his sort of core beliefs. Much of what has been in the news, of course, has been top line around his vaccine concerns or skepticism. So we expect a lot of what you'll hear out there in mainstream press will be around vaccine oversight. He also emphasized during his confirmation his interest in reforming the agency, downsizing the federal agency, reducing bureaucracy, increasing accountability. Next, an area of personal interest for him for many years has been around food policy, and specifically ultra-processed foods and how they, in his view, are a major public health threat, especially for vulnerable communities. And then two additional areas of focus: Medicare Advantage and social program priorities. So now Kennedy, again, just to clarify, he sits at the Department of Health and Human Services, a plethora of agencies under him, including, of course, US FDA. So let's go on to who's now heading or leading the FDA itself. Next slide, please. So at the FDA itself, we have a new commissioner. Dr. Martin Makary was confirmed recently. He is a physician, a surgeon, a health policy expert, and a best-selling author. And his approach is really around patient first, regulatory efficiency, drug pricing reform, so forth and so on. Again, we've listed here some of his core beliefs that he shared during his confirmation process: evidence-based regulations, transparency and trust, nutrition as prevention, faster drug approvals, and we'll talk more about that when we get into the specifics around the Center for Drugs. Industry independence to separate the pharmaceutical industry's influence from FDA decision making. And then again, some very nuanced positions around vaccine policy, some of which were just announced by the Trump administration yesterday. Next, please. So what's been going on at FDA since the Trump administration came into power? One of the major areas we've all heard about in the news, of course, are reductions across many government agencies, elimination of certain agencies, reduction in staff at other agencies. And so we have seen, indeed, at FDA, significant reduction in force along with retirements. So there's a short list here. I won't go through each of the people that were quite high level at FDA that have either through a RIF or retirement left the agency recently. And ultimately, this is an incredible loss of institutional knowledge. Some of these folks were at FDA for many years. And so, what is that going to look like? What will be the impacts with the loss of these various higher level officials at FDA? It was estimated that over 3,500 FDA employees have departed, or either reduced in force, involuntarily reduced, I should say, or through retirements. That was out of a workforce of about 19,000 folks, so somewhere roughly in around the range of 20%. Next, please. So high level, what are some of the changes that we've either heard about or we should expect? First off, recently you may have heard FDA has announced a pathway, an intention to really go down the path of utilizing AI across all centers for processing work. I believe and have had conversations with officials that this is still very, very early stage in the process of actually integrating AI, but it has been announced as a priority under the new commissioner to accelerate the utilization of AI across workflows at FDA. We've had lots of clients and others ask, should we be anticipating that the review or approval process with the reduction in forces will slow? To date, our feedback from most of our clients is they have not seen a slowdown in reviews or approvals. Again, time will tell. Looking ahead, perhaps several months, will there be an impact? Seems so far so good. Another recent announcement is FDA's intention to shift more of the inspections that they conduct to state authorities. FDA has long worked with authorities across our 50 states to essentially outsource in certain types of inspections through state agencies. There has been an announcement by FDA recently again that they will continue to shift more of these inspections to state authorities. On the foreign side, we initially saw a slowdown in notices going out to firms, to registrants, indicating FDA would be inspecting their facilities or establishments. Um, However, that has recently, in the past couple weeks, begun to resume again. We also have heard of the announcement of FDA's intention to conduct unannounced foreign inspections. And I'll touch upon this in a couple slides, particularly around food facilities. Meetings have begun to start or recommence again under the new administration. Just this week, there was a meeting of the commissioner held a public meeting, in fact, yesterday, around talc, specifically around its use in the manufacturing process. So not just in cosmetic products as we think of talc, but in the manufacturing process of certain drug products and other types of products as well, FDA regulated products. That public meeting is viewable on YouTube. You can see that now. It was live streamed yesterday and then uploaded for you to be able to view it. There is another public meeting coming up, announced on June 7th, that will cover infant formula. That will be the topic of that meeting. So we are starting to see some of these public meetings, forums resume after a period of an absence of any real communications coming out of FDA. Next slide. So let me now dive into some of the changes specific to the sectors you're in and in specific to the centers that regulate the sectors many of you today are involved in. So first, I'll talk a little bit about the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, or CFSAN. This is the center that regulates food and beverages, dietary supplements, and there have been a number of notable changes since January that I'd like to share. First off, I'll start with the Food Safety Modernization Act. As you may recall, this regulation was signed into law under President Obama in 2011 to modernize our food safety system in the US, specifically putting more responsibility on the actual US importers of products, as well as other parts of the act focusing on produce safety, etc. Within the Food Safety Modernization Act, Section 204 relates to traceability. This was a regulation, a rulemaking long in planning, long prepared for. However, it was actually delayed back in March, and the implementation deadline, instead of now being for January of 2026, has been pushed out until July 20th of 2028. So that's quite a change, 2.5-year delay in the implementation of the traceability rule around food products. Secondly, there was a recent announcement that FDA is looking for voluntary removal of certain synthetic dyes. I want to emphasize that there has been no rulemaking or proposed rulemaking around this. And in fact, it's a misnomer to call it a ban at this point. It is purely voluntarily, where FDA is asking companies to switch to natural alternatives to synthetic dyes. And so again, not a ban, no rulemaking at this point. It is purely voluntary. So how that actually plays out over time, we shall see. Typically, without it being an actual regulatory ban, it's unlikely companies will just automatically or voluntarily begin to transition, but we shall see. I mentioned about the shift of FDA to state authorities. Again, this is not new. 43 states across the US have had contracts with FDA for a number of years. The proposal is to expand this further and to have more involvement from states to actually go out into the field and conduct FDA inspections of food and beverage facilities. So that is not something new, but FDA announced an expansion of that program. I mentioned also around foreign inspections. Initially, very few notices, January, February, even into March, were being sent out by FDA, notifying companies that they may be subject to an inspection. However, we have seen that change recently. Notices are indeed, again, flowing. We've seen quite a few notices in the drug and the pharmaceutical space, also as well in the food space. I mentioned the idea that FDA will be conducting unannounced foreign inspections. Historically, their inspections for foreign facilities have always been announced for a number of reasons, but they have indicated that they intend to treat foreign firms similar to domestic firms. And for those here in the US, you may be aware that FDA does conduct unannounced inspections within the United States, simply showing up at a facility, knocking on the door, and conducting an inspection. Historically, that is not how it's been done with foreign facilities. Foreign facilities have often been given 2 or even 3 months notice that FDA will be coming on a certain date to their factory or establishment. Another area we've heard quite a bit about is around generally recognized as safe for ingredients. This is coming under scrutiny under the new administration, and specifically the self-affirmation policy, where a company can self-affirm the safety of a particular ingredient. There is likely going to be a movement towards requiring a review and approval of ingredients versus the self-affirmation pathway. More to come on that. We'll see how that plays out. Next, please. So let me shift now a little bit for those on today in the medical device sector, the Center for Devices and Radiological Health. What's going on there? I think probably the biggest thing happening and that you'll be hearing about in the months to come are the medical device user fees. These fees and those under the pharmaceutical sector have been under scrutiny. However, it is almost certain that at least negotiations will begin. These happen every 5 years. MDUFMA is authorized for 5-year periods. The program negotiations will officially begin in September of this year. That is where FDA officials and industry negotiate mutually acceptable funding, or essentially what will FDA charge, what will the user fees look like in exchange for FDA meeting specific metrics. That funding is really what drives the variances. These funding levels are what drives the variance in annual user fees amounts. So for those of you in the medical device sector, you know that every year that user fee has changed, and it has, except for the exception of 1 or 2 times since implemented, it's always gone up. And the amount that it goes up, of course, is based on the number of companies that pay the fee to help support the program of actually regulating the medical device industry, paying for the reviewers, paying for other administrative costs relating to regulating medical devices. As I mentioned earlier, There is an indication, an announcement from FDA, in fact, that they are incorporating ASI into its processes to streamline reviews, enhance regulatory rigor, and perhaps potentially accelerate the approval of medical device products. Next slide, please. So moving on then to the Center for Drug Evaluations and Research, CDER. Again, the drug or pharmaceutical user fee is up for reauthorization, again, every 5 years. Program negotiations will officially begin with public meetings in July. That program period will run from 2028 to 2032. Again, similar to medical devices, where FDA and industry negotiate mutually acceptable amounts of funding in exchange for FDA meeting specific metrics. And that, again, is what drives the variance in those user fees amounts for the PDUFA program. There are skeptics within the new administration, concerns around how these user fees are really a pay-to-play, concerns around the revolving door policy of employees working in pharma, then moving into FDA, moving back to pharma, etc. However, given the funding that FDA receives from industry and the necessity of that funding for them to perform their tasks, both in the device area and in the pharmaceutical sector, it's almost certain that user fees will continue on into the future. Interesting discussions also going on at FDA around potentially moving more over-the-counter products, commonly used prescription products, to shift them into the over-the-counter realm. So pain relievers, allergy treatments, heartburn remedies, other products like that are very commonly used, but are also prescription, moving these into the realm of over-the-counter drugs instead. And then lastly, something that came about quite recently with a Trump executive order on May 5th, where President Trump requests that U.S. drug producers increase production. Now, again, what that practically means when it's not, when there's nothing behind it to actually make that happen, it's more a proclamation of his interest in getting companies to produce more, faster, and perhaps again on the FDA side, we'll see an emphasis to try and speed approvals. Moving along to the next slide, please, to cosmetics. The Office of Cosmetics and Colors, to be completely honest, we have heard from FDA, this is a very small team, and FDA's focus seems to be really remaining around food, drugs, and devices. There is no current reorganization plan that would impact cosmetics. MOCRA compliance, true compliance, enforcement, I should say, has, I'd say, been somewhat lax, but FDA has indicated there will be more forthcoming around actual compliance for cosmetic firms. There are several proposed rules that have been pending under the MOCRA regulation, specifically the Good Manufacturing Practices rule, which that proposed rule for publication is currently announced for October of 2025. However, the final rule, that deadline is December of 2025, and it will almost certainly be missed, that final rule deadline, given that the proposed rule is only to be published in October of 2025. So again, we'll see how that plays out. A similar situation with the proposed rule for fragrance allergens that already passed in June of 2024, the proposed rule. That deadline was missed again, January of 2025. There is a FDA's unified agenda around what they'll be working on and publishing comes out in July of 2025, so later in a couple months from now. That may shed some light on the future date for the actual publication of the final rule for fragrance allergens. A similar situation, the talc proposed rule was published in December of 2024. The unified agenda to be published in July of 2025 may shed light on that final rule date. Next slide, please. So a couple other interesting topics. I have touched upon inspections and I've touched upon the state authorities. I won't dwell on this a whole lot here, but again, it's not a new practice, but it looks like one that FDA intends to expand. Secondly, the foreign inspections. Initially, there were quite a few administrative people who were laid off, who helped organize these foreign inspections. Some were then rehired. Then FDA announced that they would actually be hiring contractors to help around planning of inspections. We are seeing an uptick now in notices being sent out again. Unannounced foreign inspections. I mentioned the challenge around conducting unannounced foreign inspections. There are several. One is just the pure diplomatic challenges. Normally, of course, a foreign government is notified. Often they will also participate. There are logistical challenges with showing up in a foreign country, knocking on the door of a facility or an establishment, which may actually not even be in production on the day that they show up. So there will be a number of challenges in actually pulling off successful unannounced foreign inspections. We are seeing, and it has also been announced, increased scrutiny at U.S. ports of entry. It's quite easy for FDA to control products when they're arriving from overseas through inspections in our ports of entry. And so I anticipate we'll see some increased scrutiny in the coming months at our U.S. ports of entry. So let's move on, please. And in summary, I think, the key thing here is, stay tuned, be prepared. There is change happening at FDA across all regulated structures. The FDA structure, the FDA as a government agency is here to stay. However, there is a focus around health. There's an emphasis on American-made products. I do anticipate, as foreign manufacturers, you should be prepared for more intense scrutiny. That being said, when it comes to exports of FDA-regulated products, the fact is that America relies on thousands and thousands of products to feed us, to provide us with pharmaceutical ingredients, pharmaceutical products, our medical devices we use every day, as well as, of course, cosmetics. When you look just at our food supply, over 15% of our food supply comes from overseas. Half of the produce, 50% of fruits, 30% of vegetables, 90% of seafood, spices, 60%, wine, over 37%. 32% of our drug spending is on imported products. 30% of our medical devices are imported. And of course, thousands of cosmetic products are imported, mainly from China, the European Union, South Korea being leading exporters of cosmetic products. So this flow of goods will continue. We're going to hear in a moment from Cynthia around the tariff situation, how that, of course, has been impacting exports to the U.S. and what might be coming as that situation evolves as well. So I will pass it over to Cynthia now. Thank you very much for listening to my section, and Cynthia will cover her section, and then we'll move over to some Q&A.
So thank you to Coley for that introduction, and to David and Registrar for inviting me to your to your community to talk about kind of this evolving landscape of tariffs. I think it's probably only fitting that I mention the commissioner or the nominee for commissioner for U.S. Customs and Border Protection, since U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, is that lead agency at the border, and they're the ones, that agency is enforcing this plethora of tariffs that are coming our way. So his confirmation hearing, Rodney Scott, was held exactly 3 weeks ago, April 30th and May 1st. We should, I think, be hearing something soon. I don't see a reason why he would not move forth as the commissioner. So that, in light of David mentioning the commissioners at HHS, I thought it would be fitting to mention that as well. So when talking about uh, all of these tariffs, and it's probably, as the average citizen now probably knows more and has been hearing more about tariffs, probably more than since the Boston Tea Party, if you will. So these, when we talk about these, it's I think helpful in terms of simplifying the discussion to think about them in these categories, or what I'd like to say is in these buckets that are driven by the authorities from which that these tariffs are derived. So the first of which is the Section 232 Tariff Expansion Act of 1962, and this section within the act allows the president to impose import restrictions based on an investigation followed by an affirmative determination by the Department of Commerce that particular imports threaten to impair the U.S.'s national security. And here it's Commerce is conducting the investigation, or is the lead executive agency here. The next category is the Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. And this allows the United States Trade Representative, and the USTR is an office of the executive office of the president. So it allows the USTR to pursue unilateral trade retaliation against countries that impose unfair trade barriers against the United States. And then the third, of which we're hearing as the source of additional tariffs, is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And in the US, we kind of shorten it to IEPA. And this grants the President of the United States broad authority to address unusual and extraordinary threats to the nation's security, our foreign policy, and the economy of the United States. And what's key here is that the President has to declare a national emergency based on those actions. Next. So I'm going to go and dive a little bit deeper, next slide please, into each one of these authorities and talk a little bit about the tariffs. Now, I don't have enough time here today because it would take several hours if I went down the list of the products that are subject to these additional duties. But I'm going to talk about it in general sense, how it's working, how it's been invoked, and the enforcement of these tariffs. And remember, these are in addition to the normal tariffs that are imposed on goods through our harmonized tariff schedule of the United States, annotated. So the Section 232, again, Commerce is the lead executive agency that will undertake this investigation to look into and make a determination whether those imports do in fact pose a threat to our nation's security. Now, Commerce also on a regular basis conducts investigations regarding goods that are dumped into the U.S. market at unfair, lower than fair market value, and that results in anti-dumping and countervailing duty orders. Again, Commerce issues those on a regular basis. We're not talking about those because those exist also in addition to regular tariffs that our goods are subject to. So the 232 tariffs most recently that really came into the fore was in 2018 during the first administration of President Trump. And we saw it used aggressively here to address, again, threats to the U.S. steel industry and aluminum, as well as most recently now, we're seeing automobiles added and this year automobile parts. So again, back to 2018, we had the steel duties that were 25% on steel products, aluminum 25%, automobiles. And then again, this administration this year added automobile parts. And so most recently, a couple of weeks ago, may not have been that long, actually is during April, we saw that this was further expanded to cover beer, canned beer, and empty cans. And so a 25% duty is imposed on the value. When you think of canned beer, it's not going to be imposed on the beer importation, but just on the value of the can when those canned beer shipments come across the border. So again, this gets to be a little bit nuanced in calculating duty. You have to be concerned about the value of the inputs, the component parts. When we're thinking, especially in your industry, in food and beverage, now you have to think about those, the packaging that typically the value of which comes along with the contents. Now you have to think in those terms of, well, what's the value of the aluminum can, because the duty will be assessed on that. There are other investigations underway. Again, these investigations ensue, a determination is made, and then the administration has to act on it. And you're going to see more on pharmaceuticals and pharmaceutical ingredients, semiconductors and semiconductor manufacturing equipment, critical minerals and derivative products, throw in trucks, commercial aircraft and jet engines. And so Commerce, again, they prepare a report within 270 days from the initiation of this investigation, and then the president can take action. So that's how these work. Next, Section 301. Again, these duties are imposed or derived out of the Section 301 Act, the Trade Act of 1974. And this allows, again, the USTR to investigate. So now we have a different arm within the administration taking the lead with investigations. And this is in response to a country's unfair trade practices that occur. And most notably, this has occurred, and I think this came up in 2018. We first started seeing what we're calling the U.S.-China trade war, where there were tranches of HTS numbers products that were unveiled that was subject to these duties, and the duties ratcheted up over time. And what's notable is that those duties remained in place over the Biden administration as well. They didn't, take any of those away. So those, again, when President Trump came into office, those duties still existed under 301. So these duties were in place to focus on and kind of in response to China's actions and policies and their practices related to technology transfer, the innovation in the US and intellectual property, and that their practices have negatively impacted American economic interests as well as, again, innovation in the United States. And these duties are imposed to pressure the country, and in this case, China, to change its practices that really are woven into the way that they do business there. So these duties, and if I think about them in terms of your industry, what may touch on your products, we do see, and they were in place again back in 2018, surgical and non-surgical respirators, 50% duty, face mask, syringes, 100%, rubber, medical, and surgical gloves, 100%, 301 duties on top of any normal duties. What's interesting that I don't have here on the slide is that there was an investigation regarding the US's, I think, diminished, we don't really have an industry around shipbuilding. And so the administration now has a targeted action under 301 to impose fees on China owned and operated vessels, as well as Chinese built ships, and fees on foreign built car carriers based on capacity. So now the first 180 days, there are not going to be any fees, but after that, it's going to be implemented in two phases. Phase one, it's going to be a fee assessed on vessel owners and operators of China-based ships based on net tonnage per U.S. voyage, and I believe it's up to 5 voyages arriving in the U.S., and that is going to increase incrementally. The second category is fees on operators of Chinese-built ships, and that's going to be based on the tonnage or the containers. Again, it's going to be increased incrementally. And then the third category, fees on foreign-built car carriers, that's based on capacity. Phase two is going to be after 3 years, and that is going to address the liquid natural gas vessels, and again to increase incrementally. And the idea here is that to give the U.S. opportunity to rebuild, which is probably going to take, more, somewhere around 15, 20 years for the U.S. really to build this capacity to start building ships again. And when you think about this, it places the nation in a position where its economic interests are threatened, as well as its national security. The next category is the IEEPA tariffs, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. This was enacted in 1977, and again grants the president very broad authorities to regulate commerce in response to what are deemed as threats to the United States. And these duties are, when you think about it, again, this can only be invoked after the president has deemed that there is a national emergency. So he has to declare that and then can move to bring in these additional duties. And we've seen these come by way of executive orders recently. And at the beginning of this administration, there was much talk around the what synthetic opioids and the fentanyl crisis is doing to many of the U.S. Folks who are citizens who have fallen prey or subject to these drugs entering our nation illegally, all of these illicit drugs. And so we've seen IEEPA utilized, again, the president declaring a national emergency here, and he has invoked additional duties on not only China being a major source of these synthetic opioids and fentanyl, illicit drugs, any of those precursor ingredients as well. Additional duties were also imposed on our northern and southern countries, our longtime partners, Canada and Mexico. and with the goal of pressuring those two countries to do more at their borders to stem down the flow of those goods coming across the borders. So that's one reason that IEEPA tariffs were invoked. And then we also seen IEEPA behind the reciprocal tariffs that were imposed against countries where the administration has said that those countries have duties that have imposed a crisis on exports of our goods to those countries. So in the US, we now have those reciprocal tariffs to address the trade deficit. So now the trade deficit is the source of the national emergency and the reason for invoking those tariffs. So many of you, if you at all listening to some of the news here and how things are coming out fast and furious, that these are changing regularly. And one of the challenges here, especially for importers, is that these duties have started to stack depending on the nature of a good. You could potentially have a good that's subject to 232, to 301, to IEEPA as well. And so you can see the weight of those tariffs on the product becoming untenable. The administration did come out recently with an executive order to address a kind of unstacking some of these tariffs. So in short, this is very simplistic description of unstacking. But for example, 232 tariffs, the steel tariffs, if a good is subject to 232 or derivatives of steel, it is exempt from the IEEPA opioid tariffs, if you will. However, it is still subject to the 301. Again, different reason, different genesis for those tariffs. So it takes some time to kind of weave through and understand. And it's not something I could cover in a short time. And I thought about it and started down that road, but I say I probably would leave you more confused than trying to simplify and have a discussion regarding what's happening in this space. The last area I'll go to next is de minimis, and that for since 2015, goods that were valued at less than 800. Prior to 2015, the de minimis threshold was $200, and goods that entered with a value under what's now $800 was exempt from duty and exempt from the traditional entry process. The thing that was interesting, even back in 2015, is that an agency like FDA or Consumer Product Safety Commission, they did not recognize de minimis. So there was always some process in place that where on an import that of a good that was subject to FDA, let's say, requirements, there had to be some transmission of data to FDA for FDA to make a determination of whether to admit those goods into the US commerce. But now, with this most recent enactment and that was effective May 2nd, again, addressing the flow of these illicit drugs into the country. And this passageway was a big kind of gaping hole that needed to be addressed. So goods coming from China and Hong Kong are no longer eligible for exemption from duty and exemption from the entry process. When we think of the entry process, that's applying and sending and transmitting an HTS classification. Now, with the requirement of having to file an entry, Customs and Border Protection now has more explicit data upon which to target these shipments. So that's a big deal. And in the postal environment, the there's going to be a rate, an ad valorem rate of 54% or $100, I think whichever is higher. So again, a lot of pressure on these shipments to bring about change. And with that, I'll turn it over to Coley, and we can open it up for questions.
I think Coley is having some bad storms and has uh, had connectivity issues. So why don't I go ahead and kick off? Let's see what questions. So let me take care of some of the webinar questions out there. So a number of folks have asked, will this recording be shared with participants? Yes, it will. One of the other things that I'd like to remind you, at the end of this webinar, we'll have a survey that goes out. If you could please answer the quick survey. I think it's 3 short questions. We use that feedback to drive better presentations moving forward. So appreciate any feedback that you have there. As far as you know, we will share an email that follows up on this. And as part of that, we've got, within the email, as you can see on the screen, we've got your accreditation, and you'll have all that information in the email. Sorry, there's someone's phone that is ringing. I apologize for that. And within there, it will have the verification code, etc. So let's see here. Let me try and find a question or two here. David, you may see the questions as well. Feel free to.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to ask some, pose some here. So I think, Cynthia, this question would be for you regarding the de minimis only. Is this only concerning drugs? Is the question.
So no, it's all goods coming in that are shipped from China, and it's not just drugs, but you have to, again, the idea being that if CBP has more data, they can effectively target for these illicit shipments. The way it stands right now is that CBP is pretty blind to the products and the sheer volume of goods that are coming in that had been coming in under the de minimis threshold. And the majority, I think, is more like 67%. I think the last data I saw from CBP, those small packages originate from China. So they're addressing a big chunk of goods coming in from outside the US.
So, and related to that, the question was, if these goods are coming from outside of China and Hong Kong, does that $800, does the de minimis apply to other countries or not?
So the $800 de minimis threshold is still in place for goods coming from other than China and Hong Kong.
Perfect. Let me move on here.
I think I have one for you.
Okay, sure.
Someone had asked, how long does a foreign manufacturer have to prep for an FDA inspection once the inspection notice is received?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, historically, it can be several months. It could be, I think we've rarely ever seen a notice be sent. The process is an email is sent indicating FDA would like to inspect. The firm responds. Typically, then a travel questionnaire is sent out to the firms that are selected that will actually be inspected. So FDA starts very broad. If they're heading to a specific country, they'll send out 30 or 50 notices to companies in that country. They then whittle that list down to perhaps 6 or 8 firms that, through a back and forth with eventually a travel coordinator, it becomes clear that that firm will actually be inspected. that process can take weeks and in some cases several months. So at a minimum, we have, I think, rarely, if ever, seen FDA send out an initial notice of inspection and an inspection actually taking place in less than a month's time. So a company does have, a fair amount of time. That being said, if there are structural issues, for example, in your factory, that would be challenging to address in a matter of weeks. This is of course creates a problem. But in many cases, problems can be addressed in advance of FDA's actual arrival to be prepared for any findings they may have.
Okay, great. Got another one for you, David. I'm a food processor based in India. Do I need to begin reformulating some of my products based on the recent bans?
So again, these are actually not. These are not bans. These ingredients, the synthetic dyes, are not currently banned. There has not been any proposed rulemaking. There's been an announcement by FDA that they would voluntarily like companies to phase out specific ingredients and substitute them with other natural ingredients. So the answer there is, it's your choice. It's not currently a regulatory requirement.
Okay. This is an interesting one. I'm not sure if it's for Cynthia or for you, David. Will all vessels coming from China be embargoed by NOAA fisheries?
That's for
No, yes, there's no current embargo of China ships arriving. It's just going to be this fee that's going to be assessed based on the tonnage when they arrive, when the goods arrive. So no, there's no embargo.
Okay. Another question. What if goods are coming from outside China and Hong Kong under $800? Does de minimis apply to other countries? I think that's
So
Cynthia.
again, yes, the only change right now, I won't say only, but the big change is that goods coming from shipped from China will not be subject or allowed to come in under the de minimis privilege, if you will, under that uh, exemption from duty and exemption from entry. When goods arrive utilizing or flagging as being eligible for de minimis, the entry into the country is accomplished based on the manifest data. And that's not enough data. It doesn't give specific enough data for CBP to target for illicit goods. And we're talking drugs right now. That's the biggest, I think, issue and threat. But you also have counterfeits coming in, counterfeit medicinal products, drugs, and things that come in that way in small packages. And then this is, I think, in my opinion, the first step. We may, in a year from now, 2 years, may see a change holistically in how the administration and how Congress, in fact, there are a couple of bills on the Hill that address one, just eliminating de minimis altogether, or it could be modified in some way, or the threshold brought down to what it was prior to 2015. So I think this first step is one of probably more to come with the agency really and the administration trying to get their arms around of the sheer volume of goods coming in and their ability to effectively enforce in that space. So the short answer is it's still in place for other countries other than China and Hong Kong, but stay tuned.
And just for clarity, Cynthia, another person asked, uh, does de minimis only concern drugs?
No,
They,
no, no.
okay, perfect. All right. I think that those are the questions that I've been able to see from the audience here. We're right on time. I appreciate Cynthia and David, you guys presenting this valuable information and keeping our market up to date on the latest changes. It's an ever dynamic environment right now. So all this information is very helpful for the audience out there. Thank you so much for attending. We really appreciate uh, your attendance here. Again, when we end the webinar, you will see a short survey that if you could please fill that out. It literally is, I think, 3 questions, very quick and easy answers. We appreciate any feedback. But thank you again for attending, and thank you to our speakers today. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.